Deep Sea Embers Chapter 121 TP 130. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 121 Inches Miss Psychiatrist. When the fresh air and bright sky finally hit Duncan and his party after they exited the museum's west wing, it was Shirley who cheered first. Awesome. We've run out. Duncan originally wanted to comment on her quick change of attitude when the lady on his suddenly stirred. The woman finally woke up under the stimulation of the fresh air and the bumps along the way. Without delay, he rapidly placed the person down. As Heidi slowly came to, the first sensation that came to her was the severe pain on her forehead, followed closely by the incessant coughing caused by the small amount of smoke she inhaled. Eventually, the lady did clear up and realized she's been rescued. There's the bright sunlight and fresh air, a cue that she's not trapped inside the museum. You're awake. Nina knelt down next to the lady and looked on with concern. How are you feeling? Does it hurt? Headache? It was you who saved me. Heidi's eyes finally managed to focus and adjust to the bright outdoor light. Ah, it's the two girls. You know us. Shirley was taken aback and subconsciously said. We don't know each other, but I remember seeing you in the museum. Heidi shook her head, sitting up and looking around. Ahem, this is. You were knocked out. Me and Shirley dragged you to safety, and then my uncle rushed into the fire to save us, so we brought you out too. You're safe now, Nina said quickly. Uncle, is this the gentleman? Thank you. Heidi's eyes quickly fell on Duncan, and then she stood up vigorously while speaking as if wanting to give her gratitude. However, that didn't work because she nearly fell over again. You're welcome. Duncan swiftly caught her by the waist and helped her up. Thank you. Heidi stood weakly, bowing her head in thanks. If it weren't for you, I would have been burned to death inside. This fire is too terrible. Thank you so much. I really don't know what I should do. You don't have to say anything. Duncan smiled back at the polite woman. We actually have some connection. Mr. Morris, do you know him? Heidi froze for a moment, then looked at Duncan with some doubt. That's my father. You know him. Your pendant? Duncan gestured to the amethyst pendant on Heidi's chest. He got it from my shop. Heidi dully glanced down at her jewelry. The world is so small, right? Duncan laughed and stretched out his hand for a shake. Let me formally introduce myself. My name is Duncan, and I am the owner and manager of an antique shop in the lower city. Next to me is my niece Nina, and this one over here. My name is Shirley. Shirley immediately took the initiative to speak. In her mind, being late would somehow cause the terrifying existence that was Duncan to say her name, which might curse her or something. You. Just call me Shirley. Heidi, a pleasure to meet you all. Heidi grabbed Duncan's hand, her head still a little dizzy but adjusting quickly. I'm a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist. Duncan subconsciously raised his eyebrows. You are a psychiatrist. Yes, maybe I look a little young, but I'm a full-fledged psychiatrist with a senior license, Heidi said proudly, then fumbled with her body until she found a crumpled business card. She hands it to Duncan with both hands. This is my business card. If it can come in handy, I am ready to provide you with a free consultation. A senior licensed psychiatrist from the upper city, this one might come in handy with her connections. Duncan took the business card and scanned it. There's the address of the clinic, the doctor's full name, license number, and a 5-digit code consisting of numbers and alphabets. There's also a note before that line of code, Express Courier Code. Duncan's gaze lingered on the line of Express Courier Code. He remembered it to be part of the planned postal system based on his inherited memory. However, this was no ordinary code, it was the special service tier that costs 10 times as much as the ordinary one. And since Duncan's host body didn't have other relatives around aside from Nina, he never did find a need to spend that much money to contact someone. Duncan only roughly knew that this special mail relied on high-pressure steam pipes and standard capsule silos to achieve rapid delivery. Not only for sending letters but also for delivering small packages. Even if you take into account the manual processing at the end and the possible delivery time, it only takes a few hours at most to deliver from one corner of the city to the other. How should he put it? Duncan could only sigh at the upper city's frank expenditures. Putting away the business card fittingly, he then heard Heidi speak again. By the way, do you need to conduct a post-disaster mental assessment? The young psychiatrist quickly explained after noticing the peculiar look she was getting. Of course it's free. I don't mean anything else. The main reason is that people's spirits are prone to problems after encountering an accident, especially in places like museums where there are many historical objections. Severe mental pressure plus the influence of certain relics can easily leave a shadow on the spiritual level. Heidi seems to be trying hard to pick the proper vocabulary so that it's easy to understand such high-level knowledge. Unlike her, who's been trained in the field, those living everyday normal lives would have trouble understanding her concerns. In most cases, such questions may even appear offensive. Of course, Duncan himself wouldn't have minded and didn't need a mental assessment. When the captain of a natural moving disaster arrives on the scene, any evil spirit or demon could move aside because he's the genuine thing to be scared of. As for Shirley, this strong girl who could fight the dark demon and cultists by herself using that dark hound as a meteor star needed no evaluation. That's obvious enough. If anything, it's her victims that needs help after going through the beatdown she dishes out. But Nina, on the other hand, Nina may really need the help of a psychiatrist. Not only because of the fire today but also because of her poor mental state these days and those ominous dreams. This needs professionals to deal with it, and his own strength was useless in this field. As for the deal of making a trip to the church for therapy, that's no longer needed since we have a perfectly good doctor that's willing to service for free. Nina may need help. Duncan glanced at his niece and reached out to ruffle the girl's hair, but not just because of today's fire. She's been having weird dreams lately, and she's in a bad mental state. Nina immediately muttered in protest, "Actually, I'm fine. It's free." Heidi smiled, pointing to herself. "My usual consultation fee is, oh, it hurts." She accidentally poked at the place where she had been hit by a brick. The swelling made it easy to touch if not careful. "It's free anyways, no need to hold back." Shirley, who had been quiet for a long time next to her, also joined in. "She still owes us a favor." Then, okay, Nina hesitated and finally nodded in agreement. "Is there anything I need for a mental assessment? Is it okay here? Need to answer some questions? Or fill out the form? We need at least a quiet environment, and I need to be in a better state, at least not with this big bump on my head," Heidi explains with a smile. "I'm a professional, unlike the crappy doctors who only ask you a few questions and write you a diagnosis. Let's do this. Tomorrow is a school day, and if this Miss Nina has time, I will visit your home in the afternoon. I will ask my father for your address." Speaking of this, she paused and touched the wound on her forehead again. "As for now, I have to find a place to treat the wound first." Hiss. "There are policemen on the other side of the square and medical personnel," Duncan suggests after a moment of thought. "Do you need us to accompany you? Your current state is..." "No, I've completely sobered up." Heidi waved her hand to show she's fine. Then glancing back at the museum that was still smoking, she showed a look of fear and pity. My long-awaited vacation, it's all up in smoke now." Quote. "Vacation going up in smoke is indeed a sad thing," Duncan said casually, "but the good thing is that we just survived a disaster, didn't we?" "Well, you're right," Heidi said with a smile. Then sighing and muttering, I only hope that some heretics and mobile natural disasters will stay quiet for a bit longer. At least this way, my days off will come sooner." Sorry, I shouldn't have complained to strangers about this. That was inappropriate. Duncan. Chapter 122 inches the figure on the edge of the square. After asking where the rescue point near the square was, Heidi covered her head and left on her own since Duncan didn't want to deal with the officials at the scene. To him, having a girl and dark hound around clergies was a terrible idea no matter how he thought about it. Watching Heidi's figure gradually drift away, Duncan exhaled softly and turned to Nina. "You're not hurt anywhere, are you?" "No." Nina was still a little shocked. She had been subconsciously grabbing Duncan's sleeve, and only now did she realize this fact and let go. "You haven't said it yet. Why did you appear in the museum?" "I happened to be running an errand nearby," Duncan said with a smile, "and then I suddenly heard the news of the fire in the museum. That's why I came." Then before the other party could question further, he reached out and ruffled the girl's hair to comfort Nina. "Okay, it's all over now. I'm happy that you're not hurt. I'm not a kid anymore." Nina shook her head, and then her eyes caught sight of Shirley standing next to her. She had wanted to say something when her mind abruptly noticed some inconsistencies in their friendship. "Shirley, how come I suddenly feel like you're..." The Gothic girl's attention was still focused on Duncan when this came out of the blue. Realizing things were turning bad, the panic she tried so hard to suppress was now visibly showing on her face. Duncan didn't miss this change, of course. The reason, the panic-looking appearance from Shirley was exactly the same way from the bus fare incident earlier today. Then, as he thought about the two girls' behavior and personality, It told the ghost captain that something was definitely amiss in the story of them being classmates. There are too many loopholes. Duncan rubbed his chin, then tapped Nina's shoulder and pointed to the other. Do you really know her? Yes, her name is Shirley, and she is my new friend, but, Nina frowned, but for some reason, I can't remember when she appeared at school. Duncan turned and eyed the nervous-looking Shirley, who was already trying to reduce her presence to a minimum. Softening his tone so the other party wouldn't flee. There is still a chance to explain it yourself, or I. As soon as those words came out, Shirley cracked and jumped to defend herself. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I just wanted to investigate something, so I mixed into the school. But I never intended to hurt Nina. I even blocked a piece of falling wood back in the museum for her. Please believe me, I really didn't know she was your kin. Please let me go. Duncan didn't mean anything by his last sentence, so this bombardment of an apology caught him completely off guard. Coughing awkwardly to clear the air, not kin, she is my niece. As he spoke, his gaze also noticed Shirley's hands. Ads by PubFuture. There were traces of burns still lingering on the skin. Although the scar was faint and healing, it does add to her credibility of meaning no harm. Of course, Shirley didn't know what Duncan was thinking and was running empty in the brain. If you say, a niece, then a niece. Nina only faintly reacted at this. Showing a surprised face at her uncle, she then shifts her attention to the friend in front. Wait, you two know each other. And Shirley, why are you? We met by chance, Duncan said lightly and didn't let Shirley speak. He didn't want to expose Nina to their secret just yet either. Looks like we have a lot of things to talk about, Shirley. Shirley was about to cry and showed a sad face. If that's what you say. That's right. Okay, uncle, don't be so mean to Shirley. Nina was still confused at this time, but she could see that her new friend and uncle weren't on the friendliest terms. The former was scared silly, and the latter was rude to some extent. My brain is a mess right now. Can someone explain what's happening to me? Let's go home and talk about it slowly. Duncan exhaled softly as he watched the smoking museum in the distance. It's too chaotic here, and you two must go back to shower and change your clothes. Shirley stammered, I'm going too. Then she nodded vigorously without waiting for Duncan to speak. You're right. Duncan sighed like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He doesn't recall ever torturing the girl or threatening her. Yet, she's treating him like the evilest demon god in existence. But then, the corner of his eyes caught a glimpse of something on the edge of the square. It was an individual drenched in a black trench coat facing away from this sight. Judging from the rear view, the person should be quite tall and thin. However, the most notable feature would have to be the large black umbrella the person used on this sunny day. In this weather, where there's no wind or rain, a tall and thin man in a long trench coat with an umbrella would seem off no matter what. But since so many people were gathered on the square's edge, no one bothered to notice this strange oddity. Uncle, Nina noticed how Duncan suddenly stopped and looked curiously in the other direction. Is there anything over there? There's a guy playing with an umbrella over there. It's strange on this sunny day. Duncan said casually. Ads by PubFuture. Someone playing with an umbrella. Nina was startled. Where? I didn't see it. I didn't see it either. Shirley also rubbed her eyes, curiously following Duncan's line of sight. Are you sure you didn't see it wrong? Didn't you see it? Duncan frowned instantly. He glanced at Shirley and Nina, but after he turned his gaze back to the direction of the square in the next second, the figure with the umbrella somehow disappeared. Uncle, Nina looked at Duncan with concern. Did you inhale too much smoke and not feel well? I'm fine. Maybe I've mistaken. In order not to worry Nina, Duncan just shook his head and said indifferently. But nevertheless, his gaze remained on the other side of the square with deep concern. If it's just an umbrella weirdo, it's not a big deal. But if it's a figure that only I can see, it's a different story. Vanna brought a team of elite guardians with her after getting news of the fire in the museum. However, when she arrived, the flames had already been snuffed out. The fire has subsided on its own, and we have no evidence of a supernatural power being behind the incident. The brave grisly-looking storm priest came to report. Subsided on its own. As soon as she heard the priest's report, Vanna's expression became serious. When you led the team into the fire, did you find any clues? There was widespread excessive panic, visual hallucinations, and whispering among the citizens fleeing the scene. I suspect that there was a strong likelihood of corruption in the museum, the priest nodded, but as we searched, we found nothing inside. The only anomaly was that the flames suddenly subsided on their own. Speaking of this, The priest made another gesture of prayer to the goddess, adding, "But it is precisely due to this that the guardians and I can exit unharmed." Vanna nodded lightly over the safety of those involved. "Okay, when the fire is completely over, I will arrange for others to thoroughly scrub the museum again. We need to ensure there are no signs of abnormalities in the collection." After a brief command, the young inquisitor swept her gaze over the citizens who were being rescued and comforted. "The way she's behaving, it's as if the lady's looking for something in the crowd." But at this moment, a voice suddenly came from nearby. "Vanna. I'm here." Vanna looked up and saw Heidi waving hard at herself from the crowd. The doctor was a mess but safe nevertheless. Chapter 123 Inches sealed in memory. Heidi ran up to Vanna panting. There were guards nearby who subconsciously tried to stop her when they saw the lady approaching, but they soon recognized this distraught and disheveled lady as an advisor to the church and city hall. "I didn't expect you to personally lead the team." Heidi looked at the heavily armed Vanna in surprise before eyeing the church elites behind her. "And you brought so many people." "It's not an ordinary case for a museum to go up in flames," Vanna said before eyeing Heidi up and down several times. Then sighing in relief at her friend's safety, "Looks like your vacation is up in smokes again." It's ruined again." Heidi said with a sad and resigned face. "Why am I always so unlucky? It's then Vanna noticed the uniquely large bump on Heidi's head. Stepping forward, she reaches out with a finger to gently caress the wound with a blessing of her own. "Did you just get out of there?" "I was saved. Phew, that feels so much better." Feeling the pain on her forehead gradually subside under her friend's power, Heidi's attention slowly focused and turned fearful. She's remembering something, which she promptly passed the news on to her friend. "Vanna, I need a quiet and blessed environment right away, preferably in a church or chapel." Seeing her friend's suddenly serious expression, the inquisitor didn't waste a second of time and promptly turned to call for a priest. "Take over the scene for me. Block off the museum and raise the corruption level to spirit class." But before she could finish speaking, Vanna heard Heidi cut in with a low and hurried voice. "Isolation class. Adjust to the isolation level, and expel all uninvolved citizens to 200 meters around the square." Vanna was inwardly shocked but swiftly issued the order regardless. Then turning to the regional priest with the grizzly beard, "Take us to the nearest chapel. We need a separate prayer room with number 16 incense candles lit." The priest, who had just escaped from the fire, immediately bowed his head. "Yes, please come with me. It's near the square." Vanna quickly left with Heidi and drove to the community church a street over. Before arriving at the church, Vanna noticed that Heidi's face had started to flush abnormally. Ads by PubFuture. "What's going on?" Vanna's brows furrowed and touched Heidi's forehead. The high temperature of the fingers instantly changed her tone. "Why is it so hot?" "I may have been exposed to something in the museum," Heidi said quickly. "I used self-hypnosis to block some information in the depths of my memory. Just now the effect ended, I'm gradually starting to recall the memory." Listening to Heidi's story, Vanna's eyes widened slightly as she quickly made a judgment call. "Severe corruption of a supernatural anomaly or vision. Stop recalling immediately and slow down your thoughts." Vanna reached out and pressed Heidi's shoulder. "Look into my eyes and turn your attention elsewhere. If you really can't, hypnotize yourself again." "I'll try." Heidi gently inhales and stares deeply into Vanna's eyes, seeing the ocean waves as a reflection of the power bestowed upon those blessed with the storm goddess's power. Unfortunately, try as she might, the doctor couldn't do it. Gradually, the waves were replaced by waves of burning flame, a sea of searing heat that erupted from the dark void and oozed through her wound. This was dangerous, a critical junction point that none wanted to reach. But then something unexpected occurred. A slight coolness from Heidi's chest broke the illusion, sending the doctor into a sobering shudder. Subconsciously glancing down, she realized it was the fake crystal pendant given to her by her father from the antique shop. It's faintly glowing at an imperceptible level, however, it was enough to subdue whatever foulness at play. The next second, she heard the priest's voice coming from the front. "We have arrived at the chapel." Under the personal escort of Vanna, a powerful saint, Heidi was quickly sent into the sacred building and into an isolated prayer room, the incense candles already lit and sheltering the room from corruption. "The goddess is watching," Vanna gasped after she entered as well. In that split second, she heard the illusory sound of waves ringing in her ears, a direct sign they were being protected by the goddess herself. "It's okay now. You're safe. Go ahead and release your memories and let me see." The doctor didn't speak, only slightly nodding as she carefully took off one of her earrings. "There's a little mechanism at the end, which she pressed with her fingernail. A tiny spike popped out as a result of her action. Without hesitation, Heidi clenched the item against her palm, allowing the blood to seep out from the tiny wound. This was the most profound psychological impression she made on herself after beginning her career. When the spike pierced the palm, all the impurities sealed in the memory would be released. Ads by PubFuture. In the next second, the illusory and cascading sound of waves in the prayer room suddenly became very obvious. As the burning candles became dim and flickering due to this change, the entire room took on a fuzzy and dark air like it's been shrouded under a veil. Layers upon layers of veils swayed around the statue, and a vague mirage began to reflect over it. It was a scene that Heidi had urgently sealed in her memory, a glimpse of the momentary truth. In that shaking illusory veil, Vanna saw what Heidi had seen. In the pitch-black void, a stream of sky-rushing flames erupted. More intense than any flame in the world, more thrilling than any great power created by humans, and like a massive wave of purgatory wave, it swept through all things in sight. Even for a saint like Vanna, her muscles had tensed up involuntarily. How far did that flame reach inside the void? Hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Millions of kilometers. But what is that exactly? Is it merely pure flame? Or is it more primitive, some sort of power that can touch the ancient truth? Vanna didn't know when she was watching. It's too out of this world. Even so, the illusion eventually subsided, allowing her to relax as the sea breeze moisturized her mind. Again, it's the power of the goddess activating and a much-needed help in this situation. This is what you saw in the museum. Probably. Heidi felt her heart pounding. Even though it was a picture extracted from her own memory, it was still beyond her imagination due to the effect of self-hypnosis, but this thing, it's not like a collection that can be placed in a museum. This can't be an item from the collection, Vanna said quickly. Even if I can't tell how big it is, intuitively, I know it can't be stored in any building. You can't see something like that in the real world. Heidi was stunned, her brows tightly furrowed until she eventually spoke unsurely. I may have seen it during my unconscious state, and the self-hypnosis was performed during that time. Perhaps what I experienced isn't a direct encounter but a projection on the spiritual level. Are you sure? Vanna looked at her friend worriedly. I'm not questioning your abilities as a psychiatrist, but it is not easy to complete the temporary containment seal when you're unconscious. I have confidence. Heidi nodded slowly but firmly. I have received rigorous training in this area at the Academy of Truth. However, the containment of dangerous information will cause me to forget important key details due to my main consciousness being down. I cannot tell or show you more than this. Okay, I trust your professionalism. Vanna stared at Heidi for a moment longer before exhaling softly. It seems, you've seen something amazing. Chapter 124 Inches Projection of the Fragment. In the prayer room, where they're being watched by the goddess's statue, the two longtime friends fell into silence after the shocking scene. What exactly is that I saw? Heidi asks after being the first to come out of that shock. Vanna hesitated briefly before speaking softly. Perhaps, that was exactly what the Sun Heretics had been looking for. What the Sun Heretics have been looking for? Heidi froze for a moment. You mean Sun Fragment, a shard from their god? Vanna nodded lightly without waiting for Heidi to finish. Perhaps only the Sun Fragment is worthy of the power in your vision. While saying this, Vanna slowly raised her head and stared at the icon of the storm goddess. After all, the heretics claimed that the fragments came from their real sun. Heidi was stunned, and her expression suddenly changed for the worse. If something like that really appeared in the real world, then Planned would be in immense danger. There's no way it can be as it is now. My theory is that it's been sealed. Vanna nodded in agreement. Intel from the church indicates the sun fragment appeared 11 years ago. But now, it appears the event back then is nothing more than a leak from the real thing. The actual relic is still slumbering somewhere inside the city. And now those Sun Heretics want to wake that thing up. Heidi looked horrified. Are they trying to destroy Planned entirely? This is not the first day you've dealt with those crazy nutcases. Vanna shot a sideway glance at her friend. You should know about their mental state better than anyone. For those Suntists, anything is worth it to resurrect their black sun. What are a few city-states in their eye? If they can use the entire world as timber to fuel their god's revival, I'm sure they would do it. Heidi gawked her mouth for the longest time before gurgling out an incoherent mess as the frustration gripped the doctor's mind. The most crucial question now is what happened when you saw that vision? What happened to you? What happened to those around you? And what happened to the museum itself? Only by understanding this will we understand where the sun fragment is sleeping. No, I can't remember the details. Heidi tapped her forehead lightly. but now I'm sure I saw its projection when I was unconscious. That's when I performed the emergency hypnosis on myself to preserve important clues. Let me think about it. At that time, I was rescued and temporarily placed in a certain room on the museum's first floor. According to what they told me after coming out, that room is close to the main exhibition area. Ads by PubFuture. Heidi struggled to remember, so she turned to her friend for help. Can't you conclude that the clue is in the museum based on this? It's difficult. Merely from the occult perspective, what you saw isn't the main body, so we have no way of knowing where the main body is. For all we know, the museum is merely an exhaust valve that happened by accident. What's more, a human's consciousness is fragile when not in control. You could have crossed paths with it by accident, and now the connection has already moved somewhere else. Vanna explained patiently and then suddenly shook her head. Of course, we will still conduct a search of the museum at the highest level and maintain monitoring afterward. After all, anomalies and visions are always irregular. Maybe the fragment will really remain in the museum in another sealed form. Even if not, we may still be able to find some clues in the fire to explain why the rift happened to appear in the museum. But the follow-up search has nothing to do with you. From a security point of view, you'd better stay away from that museum for the next month. Of course, I can't wait to keep my distance from this. Heidi nodded vehemently. I've had enough bad luck. Vanna silently looked at her friend, who had been unlucky since she was a child, with a face of wanting to add something, but in the end, she kept it inside. Then out of nowhere, the Inquisitor remembered something else on her mind. By the way, who were you rescued by? Two girls who are still in school and a man who looks to be in his 40s. Heidi thought for a moment, and coincidentally, one of those two girls happened to be my father's student whom he made a home visit the other day. The man is her uncle, didn't I mention it to you? His name is Duncan, and he's the owner and manager of an antique store. I'm a little allergic to the name, Duncan. Right now, the corner of Vanna's mouth visibly twitched, although I know it's definitely not the same person. I had the same reaction as you when I heard this name from my father for the first time. Heidi spread her hands out. Speaking of which, I also promised that gentleman I would go to his house tomorrow for a mental session with his niece. I intend to use the visit to give a formal thanks for saving me tomorrow. Today is such a mess, and me leaving in such a hurry is improper and bad manners. Strictly speaking, it's not just the niece who needs to do a psychological assessment. Vanna's expression suddenly became serious, and her eyes stared straight at Heidi. All three of those people need it. Why? Heidi subconsciously spoke but then reacted. Ah. Yes, they were all around you, and you saw the sun fragments in your coma. Vanna stared into Heidi's eyes to pass on her meaning. If it was really the remains of an ancient god, the pollution might have spread to them along your consciousness. Perhaps the scale of this spreading pollution is small, but it can also be fatal for ordinary people. Inside the antique shop in the lower city, Duncan had closed the door early and was sitting in a relaxed position behind the counter. Meanwhile, Nina and Shirley sat opposite of him after they finished showering and changing into new clothes. However, Shirley still wore her black gothic dress since she refused Nina's clothes due to the size difference. It couldn't be helped, both girls were too different in stature. Of course, it's not known if there are other reasons for the refusal. For all they knew, Shirley only refused because she didn't want to accept a gift from an evil god's family. Ads by PubFuture. In the middle of the counter was the Dove, who was pacing leisurely around the table happily while enjoying her dish full of fries. Duncan promised, and so shall it be done. I got her precious fries, and Nina returned home safely. What more could Duncan ask for today aside from further mastering of his flame? Oh wait, he did learn something new, so he got everything he wanted. The only one that's not happy was Shirley though. The gothic girl was about to cry again, that's several times in one day. So, Shirley, you're not actually my classmate, you're just using some kind of detective skills to sneak into the school to investigate something. Nina looked at her hard-earned friend with a complicated expression. You don't like steam and machinery either. I can't even read those textbooks, Shirley spoke cautiously, answering Nina's question while making sure to sneak a glance at Duncan for his reaction. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Nina didn't seem to notice Shirley's apology and continued to frown in confusion. But how did you do it? Looking back now, you always did appear in my classroom out of the blue, and then often next to me without anyone noticing you. Shirley quickly glanced at Duncan again. After confirming that the other party's expression was still calm, she muttered in a low voice, it's actually a little supernatural ability of mine. Ability. Nina's eyes widened in surprise. Could it be that you are an investigator for the church? No, no, I'm not from the church. Shirley glanced at Duncan again for the third time already, recalling what those priests like to call people like herself. I'm what you would call a wild transcendent. Nina looked surprised. Transcendence in the wild. If we're not registered, Shirley spoke as if she's given up on something and lashed out when the topic was brought up. Those dogs from the church are always acting so high and mighty. Just because people like me don't want to be monitored, they give us these derogatory titles. Nina listened to Shirley's explanation with an astonished face and eyed the Gothic girl repeatedly. Finally, the gesture left the more petite girl uncomfortable. Why are you looking at me like that? You're amazing, Nina suddenly exclaims. Shirley was immediately overwhelmed by that remark. That's all you have to say? Yes. Chapter 125 Inches Get to know each other. For Shirley, the fact that Nina was so focused on subtleties was a good thing. From the bottom of her heart, she has regarded this innocent and ordinary girl in front of her as kin of the subspace god, and not just any kind, but a relative at the daughter level. Therefore, her chance of surviving could only go up if she pleases Nina's antics. On the other hand, Nina didn't know how much was hidden under Shirley's awkward and stiff smile. To her, this merely represented an excellent opportunity to learn more besides the textbooks, regular stuff. Sure, she's met Transcendent from the church, but those trips didn't count. Where do you usually live? Do you have your own secret base or something? Or is there a very mysterious organization? Do you usually hide in caves? Or somewhere like a sewer? Is there a warehouse-like place to store all kinds of ceremonial items? Were you born with special abilities? Or is there some sort of supernatural item you use? Are you one of those legendary mages? I've heard that this ancient profession is where they can unleash spells without relying on any gods, and their power is said to come from the bloodline. What do you usually eat? Do you ever want to drink herbs or strange animal blood? Yes. No. Do you normally eat too? Is it all true? Nina's questions came one after another, crackling endlessly like a tape recording on rewind. About halfway through, Shirley had already broken out into cold sweat on her forehead. Not because she couldn't answer the other party's questions, but because there was a Duncan next to her. Meanwhile, Duncan had been silently watching Shirley from his seat with a cordial smile. From the surface, he looked no more than a parent supervising his children during a play date with a classmate. You seem to be afraid of my uncle. Even if Nina was denser in this regard, she could still notice Shirley's strange behavior towards her uncle. Between you two, did something happen? No, it's nothing. It's truly nothing. Shirley almost jerked up from her seat and started waving defensively. What can your uncle and I have between us? I'm still just a kid. As soon as Duncan heard this, he felt as if something was wrong with that comment. Nevertheless, he knew better than to stop the fun between the girls. Making a cough to clear his throat, he interrupts to keep Shirley from going on a tangent. Actually, it's nothing. We merely bumped into each other on the bus when she tried to dodge the fare. Just because of that, Nina looked at Shirley in surprise. That shouldn't have left such a big trauma, but my uncle is right. Dodging your bus fare is bad. Ads by PubFuture. Shirley's tears were about to fall. I really won't skip the ticket in the future. Nina nodded, then seemed to remember something else and stared at the petite girl. Then, can you tell me what exactly are you investigating? You befriended me because of your investigation. Shirley's body jerked straight, her gaze wandering to the side where it met Duncan's ominous stare that left her soul half departing for the afterworld. I was investigating the fire 11 years ago. Shirley lowered her head and murmured in resignation. The official records mentioned the factory leak happened in the 6th block. The fire 11 years ago. Nina's eyes widened suddenly, her tone filled with astonishment. Wait, you also know about the fire 11 years ago? You know it too. Shirley was also surprised and shot up from her chair. You also experienced that fire. Of course I know. My parents died in that fire. I was 6 years old when Uncle Duncan rescued me from that incident, Nina said in a hurry, gesticulating with her hands subconsciously. But everyone always said I was confused by the toxic fumes on the street. They all claim there was no fire at all, and even later, the newspapers printed that it's a factory mishap. That year, I was also 6 years old, and my parents died in the fire. I remember it clearly. Shirley looked straight into Nina's eyes, but the people around me also told me there was no fire at all. No wonder Dog said that he smelled something familiar on you. As soon as her words fell out, Duncan's voice suddenly cuts in from the side. So, it was Dog who guided you to approach Nina by sneaking into the school. You don't know why either, and that's why you're so surprised by Nina's words just now. Shirley quickly nodded while meeting Duncan's eye. Dog? Who is Dog? Nina gave a somewhat puzzled look. Dog, Shirley grew hesitant and didn't know how to go about this. Shifting her gaze to Duncan for help, she then turns back to Nina after getting no signs of rejection. Dog is my friend. He's currently next to me, but his appearance may be a little scary. As soon as Shirley said this, her heart instantly flew into turmoil. Despite there being an obvious shadow of subspace sitting here with them, she still has to go with this weird, humorous act of pretending Dog is the scariest existence in the room. That's just ridiculous no matter how she thought about it. Nina looked around curiously for signs of this. Dog, however, after not finding the individual that was supposed to be beside Shirley, the girl figured it was better to just ask. Then can you let me meet Dog since he's your friend? What is so scary about him if you're both friends? Ads by PubFuture. Shirley was still a little hesitant, so Duncan stepped in by tapping his finger on the table to get their attention. Then you have to be mentally prepared. I have seen Dog's appearance. It is quite scary looking. Then I'm even more curious. Nina became even more excited after getting confirmation from her uncle. Oh please, let me meet him. I'm so curious about why her friend has such a strange name. Well, since you want to see it, Duncan shrugged and gave Shirley a helpless look. Let Dog come out and say hello. After all, he is also today's guest. Under normal circumstances, Shirley would never expose the secrets of herself and Dog to strangers. Walking with a shadow demon in the city-state of order was a highly taboo thing. The priests of the Storm Church would storm her with a 6-barreled machine gun if they ever caught wind of this fact. All right, she nodded, then slowly raised her arm. In the next second, in Nina's astonished and slightly nervous gaze, pitch-black flames and smoke suddenly rose beside Shirley. Chains extended from the flames, and at the end of the smoking blackness, the figure of a ghostly demon condensed and materialized. To the dismay of his mistress and Nina, the dark hound appeared as quickly as he shrunk into a ball. Talk about embarrassing. For a skeletal demon dog, he was posturing with his paws cusped over his hollow red sockets like a baby pup. Duncan shot a WTF look at Shirley right away. To be fair, seeing Dog like this isn't as shocking as knowing a skeletal dog can move and talk. He's actually quite cute if you ask me. On the other side, Nina was flabbergasted and didn't speak for the longest time until she gawked a word out. Shirley quickly spoke. I did say you would be scared. But before they could go further, Nina suddenly exclaimed gleefully, this is so incredible. Shirley. Hello. While Shirley was lost in confusion, Nina had already begun to tentatively greet the hound, Mr. Dog. Are you a, sir? Dark hounds have no gender, but you can call me that if you like, Dog replied sullenly while glancing around at the room. You're not afraid of me? No, not really. Although you do look a little scary, Nina thought for a moment, but then formed a big smile on her face. But I'm quite bold too. Chapter 126 inches. What did you see? Seeing Nina's expression of excitement and curiosity after a moment of astonishment and nervousness, Shirley couldn't help but mutter a complaint. You can't be described as bold anymore. Nina didn't hear what Shirley was muttering at all. Instead, her attention was entirely attracted by the black bone hound in front of her. After she jumped off the chair, the girl strolled around Dog for 2 full circles while eyeing the creature up and down. Then when she finally saw Dog's reddish eye sockets, the girl finally showed a startled look, but that's it, only a little shock and nothing more. So amazing, she repeated again. Nina even looked like she wanted to reach out and touch Dog's bony skull like she was petting an animal. But at the last second, the girl withdrew her hand and looked up at Shirley. This is the first time I've seen such a supernatural existence with my own eyes. What is Dog? Is he a creature summoned by a magical spell? Or, he's a demon, Shirley replied frankly as if to scare Nina and make the other party slightly aware of the dangers. He's the most dangerous kind of demon. Nina was really taken aback. She probably didn't expect this polite-looking skeletal dog to be a demon. Then, showing an incredulous face, is he really a demon? Strictly speaking, I'm a shadow demon. Dog partly raised his head and snuck a peek at Nina by lifting one of his paws from his face. Miss, this may be the first time you've seen a shadow demon, but do not get the false impression about my kind. My compatriots are very diverse, but they are usually all fierce and ruthless. Shadow. Nina was stunned by the explanation. She finally woke up from the novel tension of seeing a supernatural being for the first time and recalled what the textbooks had said. Surely, you. As you can see, I'm tied to a shadow demon. Shirley raised her arm and showed Nina the chain that's fused with her body, so I don't want people to know my secret, do you understand? If the members of the Storm Church find out, they will not hesitate to throw me into the fire or open sea. Shirley's expression was particularly grim, which was passed on to Nina on how severe the consequences are if true. Quote, I've read from the books that the deep sea is full of crazy and evil creations, that they are the residual discharge of dark and unholy gods. But from Mr. Dog's appearance, Nina stopped and hesitated to continue since it's rude to be so presumptuous. Dog is special, Shirley replied lightly. Unlike a normal shadow demon with no heart and emotions, Dog does. Even though I can't explain why he does and how this came to be, this allows him to survive outside the deep sea. Nina was stunned and nodded half understandingly, oh. While speaking, she fell into a short silence while scratching her head. Then turning to her uncle for help due to the distress, Uncle, I feel like my mind is getting dizzy again. Going through the chaotic encounter today, then the knowledge of Shirley's secret, any normal school girl would get dizzy by the absurdity of it all. It's already a blessing she's not crashing down and raising the white flag. You've been through a lot today, came Duncan's gentle and calming words, some confusion is normal. Ads by PubFuture. Nina blinked, finally realizing that she had ignored something crucial since the start of all things. Uncle, do you know Shirley from before? How about her secret? Do you also know about Dog? I did, Duncan smiled, but I didn't know she was the friend you mentioned the other day. Then, Nina hesitated, are you also investigating what happened 11 years ago? Are you investigating together? Sort of. We've worked together once or twice by chance, Duncan nodded. Why do I feel like I'm the only one in the dark? Nina muttered belatedly, and you are investigating what happened 11 years ago, is there any secret about what happened 11 years ago? We don't know yet, but we all agree that there was a fire that had been erased back then, Duncan said quietly, his gaze falling on Nina. I'm sorry, I'm not hiding it from you because I mean to keep you in the dark, but this is a field out of your knowledge. It's too dangerous. Uncle, what about you? Nina grew slightly angry. Uncle, aren't you in danger too? While the man himself didn't comment, Shirley on the side had begun to mutter in complaint. Of course your uncle is in danger, your uncle is the most dangerous. Duncan instantly shot a warning look at Shirley, silencing any chance of the truth from coming out. I am an adult, and as your uncle, I have a duty to keep you safe. Besides, I'm more powerful than you think. Nina's gaze kept wandering between Duncan and Shirley, her expression repeatedly changing due to the mess inside her head. However, of all the fuss and stubbornness of an adolescent teen, it all ended with a sigh. It's getting dark, she glanced out the window and saw the dimming light, I'll go get dinner ready. Shirley, you can stay here too. It's not safe when it's dark. Ah, yes, Shirley was stunned and didn't react at once. But soon, she understood what Nina meant and frantically waved her hand, no need. Dog and I can make it back. Sadly, Duncan's voice had cut in from the side before the Gothic girl could reject the goodwill. Stay, the sun will go down in a few minutes, and the streets will be full of guardians. Are you sure you want to tangle with the curfew set by the city? Shirley froze with a visible shudder, her eyes glancing out the window as well. Eventually, her expression deflated into a whimpering frown at knowing she could no longer escape the antique store tonight. All right, the girl sat down dejectedly, barely holding up a smile to face Nina. Is there anything I can do to help? No, I always cook at home, Nina giggled with delight as she strolled towards the staircase. Then suddenly, she swung around and eyed Shirley sternly. Shirley, are we friends? Shirley didn't expect this, so her first reaction was to look at Duncan, but the latter only looked away like it was none of his business. Finally, after a short and uncomfortable silence, she shook her head, no. Ads by PubFuture. But then she nodded again, but I can try. Nina squealed over the second part. Although she didn't get the answer she so dearly desired, Nina was nevertheless pleased and jogged up the stairs with brisk fluidity. Shirley stood motionlessly on the first floor, only coming back to reality when she heard Duncan's voice again. Thank you. Popping her eyes from surprise, Shirley quickly sat back into her chair nervously. Why are you thanking me? Nina has no friends at school. Duncan has become accustomed to the overly antsy reaction of the other girl, so he doesn't mind it. The fact that you're willing to try is a wonderful thing for her. She's been so happy in the past 2 days when she told me about a new friend at school. Shirley blinked in confusion, somewhat not understanding. I still don't quite understand. Shirley appears troubled by the gratitude from the man. Your role here is to play an ordinary person, right? Nina, she doesn't seem to know about how special you are. It's the same at school. Her existence was so small that if it weren't for Dog guiding me, I wouldn't have found her at all. But as a kin favored by you, she. Not kin, she's my niece, Duncan repeated and then looked at the other with an extremely serious expression. Now that Nina is gone, I have a question for you. Go ahead, I'm ready. Dog guided you to get closer to Nina, right? Right. Quote. Because Dog smelled a specific aura on Nina, right? Based on this, he judged that Nina had something to do with the fire 11 years ago. Yes. What kind of aura is it? Is it the same energy signature as that factory? Or is it something else? This time Shirley didn't answer. Instead, she shifted her sight to Dog in the corner of the shop. Under Duncan's gaze, Dog hesitated for a few seconds before finally crawling over to the table. There are countless ashes floating around her, Mr. Duncan. Chapter 127 Inches Dinner Together. Duncan's heart literally skipped a beat after hearing Dog's description. Ashes are floating around Nina. A lot of ashes, what does that mean? Turning his gaze towards the staircase, an uncomfortable feeling gripped the man's mood as he listened to the faint sound of cooking in the kitchen. It's the same usual clink and clank of the pots, the normal optimistic girl preparing dinner, yet something's changed in his opinion with this new discovery. Withdrawing his gaze to stare at Shirley to ensure there was no lie, so let me get the facts straight. After Dog told you about a very suspicious target inside the school, you snuck in and approached Nina. Meanwhile, you also started to approach the scientists in the city in search of clues to unlocking the fire from 11 years ago. Shirley nodded in confirmation. Yes. I'm assuming you're not actually interested in the sun fragment then. What's the point of looking for a fragment of some dark god? Shirley counters, so a flame can tell me why it burned the city back then. What I'm looking for is the one responsible for setting things into motion back then. But it's no ordinary fire. Duncan met the Gothic girl's gaze. If it was really a fragment of the dark sun, it would be more powerful than what burned the factory. Shirley, you're doing something very, very dangerous. I'll speak bluntly, so don't be angry. Shirley thought for a moment before heaving heavily. I think sitting here with you is already dangerous enough. Haha, probably. Duncan was slightly startled by the frankness and couldn't help but chuckle. Getting up from behind the counter to slowly walk towards the stairs, I'm just making a kind reminder. Of course, how to go about it is your business. Wait a minute, Shirley bolted from her chair as if wanting to say something. From the way you're speaking, you didn't know that Nina was special. Duncan halted, and after a slight hesitation, he raised his finger and pointed to his eyes. It seems that this body's eyes are not very good. That's why I haven't noticed it. This body. Shirley keenly picked up on those words and came to a conclusion. She didn't dare to point out her discovery, of course, but she did watch the other party walk up the stairs with her jaws wide open. What are you going to do now? Ads by PubFuture. What am I going to do? Go upstairs and have dinner, of course, Duncan said rightfully as he glanced down at the girl. And you too, aren't both of you coming too? It's dinner time. It's dinner time. Eating food at the home of a shadow of subspace. Shirley didn't know how to describe the many strange thoughts that flashed into her head, nor did she know how her legs managed to follow the boss's trail. Regardless, she did end up going upstairs to the second floor, where she saw for the first time the cramped kitchen. There's nothing special here, merely a table, a few plates of heated hard bread, and a huge pot of soup in the middle. This arrangement was typical of every household in the lower city. However, there was something special here that caught Shirley's eye. Unlike most families in Planned, this pot had a few pieces of fish floating in the white broth. I made the soup with the remaining half of the salted fish, Nina said to Duncan with a smile and then looked at Shirley. Uncle bought the fish the other day. You need to taste it. It's so good. Shirley rigidly sat down at the dining table as instructed, her eyes still slightly confused as she scanned the assortments. You're thinking, why is the food so ordinary, right? No, this is much better than what I usually eat, Shirley replied subconsciously, then added, but I really didn't expect it to be such an ordinary assortment. This fish looks a little strange. Dog poked his skeletal head up from the side and glanced at the food on the table. Then, with a perplexed voice, why am I getting a familiar feeling from this? What do you know? Shirley glanced at her friend. You who usually gnaw at stones as cookies shouldn't comment. Doesn't Mr. Dog eat? Nina looked up in surprise when she heard this. Shadow demons don't eat human food. In fact, they don't eat at all. Shirley nodded humphrey. Aside from occasionally nibbling on some stones to grind their teeth, they don't consume anything. When Dog heard this, the dark hound promptly swung his head to the side in a huff. That hurts. Do you know how hard it was for me to find ways to feed you? I foraged and stole food to raise you. What's wrong with me occasionally eating some stone? As he spoke though, Dog didn't forget to take another look at the soup pot by leaning over the table. Then after a good half-minute, the dark hound suddenly shuddered and retracted his gaze. Dog, what's wrong with you? Shirley was stunned by her partner's reaction. Ads by PubFuture. Dog shot a look at Duncan first, then back at Shirley. Finally, he just sat there like a statue with an idiotic smile. What? You don't like fish? The indescribable swirl of light and shadow, Duncan asked with a smile. Dog immediately shook his head like a rocking drum, acting all innocent and clueless. What fish? That's a bloody offspring heir of the deep sea. You chopped it up and stewed the guy into a soup. How can you even ask if I want to eat it? Sure, you changed it somehow, and now it's a fish, but that's not the point. I don't like to eat fish, Dog answers robotically. Duncan didn't know why Dog would behave so weirdly before the soup. To him, this must be some sort of habit of a shadow demon. Instead, the man had shifted his attention to Nina. Nina looked no different from normal. Although she may have a little more on her mind, the sensible child gave no impression that something was wrong. However, Duncan understood the veiled curtain that shrouded the factory in the 6th district had already taken his niece. The issue was how deep the infection was. Uncle. Nina finally noticed Duncan's gaze and asked with a look of confusion, what's wrong? Duncan didn't answer, only reaching out to gently stroke the girl's hair like a good elder. I'm not a child anymore. Nina exclaims in defense, surprised by the sudden gesture. I know, you're not a kid anymore, Duncan laughed, a tiny green flame lingering on a strand of Nina's hair, but you're still a child to me. Nina puffed out her cheeks grumpily. Uncle, are you going to investigate things with Shirley again in the future? She finally couldn't help but ask. Within the limits of safety, Duncan replied casually. Can you not go? Duncan shook his head. Can't. Nina grew silent for a moment, then what can I do? Eat well, Duncan smiled and pointed to the table, then sleep well, study hard, and finally protect yourself while your uncle I work. Nina stuffed a piece of bread into her mouth. Okay, chapter 128 inches changing course. The second floor of the antique shop was not big by any means. Except for the kitchen and the bathroom, there were only 2 other rooms. One for Duncan and the other for Nina. Shirley, who was temporarily staying overnight, could obviously only sleep with Nina. Actually, I can sleep in the hallway. Shirley seemed a little embarrassed watching Nina busy preparing for herself, or I can sleep on the ground on the first floor. That's not okay, Nina said, glancing toward the door. Uncle Duncan had gone back to his room, so it was just her and Shirley, plus Dog who was napping nearby. How can we let a guest sleep in the corridor, and on the first floor, they're all my uncle's babies? He wouldn't agree anyways. His baby. Shirley was stunned for a moment, recalling what she had seen on the first floor. Due to how nervous she had been, the Gothic girl only assumed those things were piles of rags and garbage used to trick the folks in the neighborhood. But she quickly realized something again. Here, the Mr. Duncan was just an ordinary person, and Nina in front of her did not know about her uncle's other face. Thinking of this, Shirley's expression became a little strange under the bright light brought by the electric lamp. Are you really not angry? Nina stopped making the bed and raised her eyebrows. Angry? Why? I actually lied to you for a long time, Shirley whispered. She had rarely been so embarrassed and quiet in her life. I only approached you at first because of Dog's reminder, but I didn't expect you to believe me so easily and become my friend. I assumed you would be a little angry with me if you ever found out. No one had spoken to me at school for a long time, and I thought, Nina muttered but quickly shook her head, but I'm really not angry. No matter what the reason, at least you actually talked to me, went shopping with me, and went to the museum together. Shirley wasn't accustomed to Nina's calm reaction, or rather, she had long been accustomed to a colder interpersonal environment, hence the awkwardness. You are such a strange person. Am I? Nina tilted her head after making the bed. I think someone said that to me as well a long time ago. I think their words were, how can this kid be so frank inside? While speaking, she beckoned to Shirley. Come sit. Why do you keep standing there? Shirley froze for a moment, hesitating if she should do as told. But then a strange and bizarre feeling flowed out of the Gothic girl's heart, and that was a sense of warmth. The light is so bright, as if to break the tension, or maybe just to find things to talk about, Shirley whispered after crawling into bed. Ads by PubFuture. Don't you have electric lights where you live? Nina was a little surprised. I live in an older neighborhood where there are no electric lights, Shirley blushed. I still need to use candles when the night falls. Ah, Nina opened her mouth, feeling a little awkward at not being more aware of the other party's situation. Stiffly changing the subject, do you want to change into pajamas? I still have one from 2 years ago, so the size should fit. Okay, sleep early tonight. Tomorrow we can go around the neighborhood and get you some new clothes. Your skirt is already burned. I have no money. Then it's my gift to you. Okay, comma. Unlike what others would have expected, Duncan hasn't fallen asleep in his bed yet. Instead, he's been sitting in front of the windowsill and quietly staring into the distance. Closing his eyes, Duncan allowed his powers to activate. From where he sat, 2 clusters of green flames were flickering nearby in his dark field of vision. They're the marks he left on the girls, one for Shirley and the other for Nina. He still doesn't know what the ashes around Nina meant, what secrets are buried in the city, where the veiled curtain came from, or who's manipulating everything from behind the scenes, but one thing's certain, he's getting closer to the truth from 11 years ago. Little by little, he's going to pry apart the fog. As to why he's leaving a mark on Nina, that's insurance on his part. Today was a warning to him. If he hadn't acted in time, who knows what might have happened. He won't permit another accident like that of the museum to occur. Opening his eyes again after confirming the marks were secure, Duncan looked down at his hands. This body is still too weak for my liking. The power transmitted through the connection limits my perception. If Shirley hadn't come along, I never would have known about the ashes around Nina. Taking a small breath, Duncan shifts his focus back to the ship where the main body lies. Immediately, the ghost captain shot open his eyes and left the captain's quarter. Oh, how wonderful, Captain. Your most loyal and faithful first mate is here too. The noisy yapping of the goat head came the second he walked out the door. Ads by PubFuture. In what direction is the city-state of planned? Duncan glanced at the statue and interrupted the other quite skillfully. Place, the city-state of planned. The goat head was caught off guard. Showing a moment of astonishment from the wooden face, the statue suddenly got all excited in his voice. Planned. A human city-state. Oh, the great Captain Duncan is finally willing to embark on a plundering expedition. Is this your attack target? Are we going to directly hit the port, or are we plundering the merchant ships on the coastlines? Maybe the naval force of Planned will. Shut up. Don't make any extra arrangements. Duncan went straight to the mapping table and knocked on the table to get his orders through. I want to know which direction leads to that city-state. Ooh, right, okay, as you wish. As the goat head's voice became low and drawn out, the fog-filled map suddenly started to show a flashing dot at the edge of the chart. The planned city-state you're looking for, it shouldn't be too far off, the statue said respectfully. Ah, it's a pity that the mapping chart has been asleep for too long. It can only mark the approximate location of planned right now, and the sea conditions and markers along the way are still shrouded with the unknown. It seems very far away. Duncan glanced at the bright spot in the fog and judged the journey wouldn't be a short one. How long will it take if we go at full speed? Half a month. Maybe a month. In fact, it's already very fast. We haven't really reached the boundary of civilization yet, the goat head confessed. You can also choose to let the vanished go at full speed in the spirit world, but that method isn't very safe. Although the spirit world itself is not a big threat to us, many daring entities of the deep sea may find trouble with us. The deep sea. Duncan subconsciously thought of dog, but quickly shook his head, then sail in the real sea first while approaching planned. Another question, are we able to remain hidden from the city-states? He had to be wary of asking this question because it posed a risk to his identity. Nevertheless, Duncan did so anyways since it was a chance for him to test the statue's limits again. There was no emotion in the obsidian eyes of the goat head. He just looked at the captain quietly before speaking as usual. We can hide in the fog, and if necessary, briefly dive into the reflection of the broken waves. That way, we may be able to come up to 15 miles of the shore without being detected. But not closer. The eyes of the gods will perceive us, and the cathedrals of the city-state will issue the warning. Your experience is from a century ago, Duncan said calmly. Does it still work now? Of course, the goat head said lightly. A century is nothing to the gods. They wouldn't have changed much in this duration. Duncan breathed a sigh of relief. Very good, then let the vanished approach planned. Be sure to keep us hidden the entire time. May I ask something? The statue asks again, what do you plan to do there? A test, Duncan thought for a moment, smiling as he formulated his plan. Let's see if the Wi-Fi will be better. Goat head. What does that mean? Go and let I explain it to you. No, your most loyal first mate does not need or care of the meaning. Chapter 129 Inches Dark Night. Duncan didn't know why, but he got this sensation that something had changed with the ship. What's the word? Satisfaction. Yes, that's the word best to describe the mood of the Vanished as it sailed at top speed against the waves. Strolling the deck as he watched the ghostly sails drumming against the non-existent wind, he raised his head and looked up at the towering mast. Then he knocked on the railing and said thoughtfully, "You are also bored with the aimless drifting, right?" The Vanished did not answer him, only slightly creaking under the stress of the waters from below deck. But the ship didn't need words, instead, it had ropes that slithered across the deck like a snake to dangle beside Duncan. That's not cute, you know, it's even a little scary. Duncan glanced at the snakish cable in front of himself. Is this how you scared Alice the last time? The cable swayed in place twice and quickly slipped away like a guilty child. Heaving a small breath, Duncan wanted to enjoy the fresh breeze at night when a sudden jerk of his power hit him. It's from afar, much further away than what's on the ship. At first, he didn't react but realized it was directly coming planned. In the city-state, there are only several individuals that he's marked, and this time it's in Nina's room next door. Without hesitation, he allowed his consciousness to float into the darkness, feeling his way to the source. He assumed it may be his niece's mark calling for help, but it turns out it wasn't, it's actually Shirley's. What happened to Shirley? Without a second delay, Duncan shifted the main focus of his mind back to the second body inside the antique shop. Rushing up, he lightly knocked on the girl's door to no avail. There's no movement inside. After a brief hesitation, the man knew he couldn't wait any longer as Shirley's mark cried out again. So he pushed the door open and entered. Just like when she was a child, Nina always slept without locking the door. The bedroom was dark, with only the shimmering light of the street lamp from the window illuminating the outline of things. As far as Duncan could tell, there was nothing abnormal here. Shirley and Nina were sleeping quietly on the bed, one head facing the other end, and the other had her leg up against the former's belly. The sleeping position is very artistic. Of course, Duncan wasn't interested in paying attention to the sleeping positions of the two girls. Instead, he's more worried about the crumpled forehead on Shirley's face and the squirming black line swimming around the girl's arm. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan didn't like what he saw. Activating the mark he left on Shirley, he intends to use the special properties of his ghost fire to find the source of erosion in the room. Immediately, a tiny green flame rose up beside the bed to illuminate the surroundings. However, the flame only flickered a few times before eventually staying in place. There is no erosion in the room. Duncan's brow furrowed even deeper, and he moved closer to observe Shirley's pained expression. Because he wasn't sure how much the ghost fire affected the living, he couldn't directly release a large area of flame to scan the entire room like in the factory. Still, even a little spark from his ghost flame should draw a reaction if there's anything here. The erosion is not in the real world. Then the spirit world, or is it something else? Duncan swiftly went over the possibilities, thinking up what options he had to choose from. Then quickly running back to his own bedroom next door, he yanked the dove who was napping by the windowsill. Wake up, we're spirit walking. After a series of cooing protests from Duncan once again entered the dark tunnel with the endless starlight. He first calmed his mind, then allowed his consciousness to fly towards what he wanted. Unlike the mark he left on the White Oak steamship in Vanna, Shirley's mark was intentionally made by him, meaning it was far more stable and easier to connect in here. Shirley shot open her eyes and found herself sleeping in a familiar yet unfamiliar bedroom. Touching her temple to get the lightheadedness from her mind, she slowly crawled up from the sleeping position to scan the room. Gradually, memories of where she was surfaced, sending her eyes into a wide angering shock. Jumping in a fury, she got out of bed and swore a long verse of curses in the air. Damn it, damn it. XXXXX, it's this again. Unlike in reality, where she's wearing Nina's passed-down pajamas, Shirley had on a light pink pajama here, and her voice had devolved into an immature version found only in her memories. Don't XXX torture me anymore. Don't XXX torture me anymore. Shirley roared the phrase over and over again in the darkness, her limbs punching and kicking at the mottled planks of the wall. She even tried to bite at the doorknob to force it open. Sadly, try as she might, the younger version of the girl could do nothing but whimper at the doorway, watching painfully as the morning light slowly seeped through the crack. Eventually, a series of faint footsteps reached her ears from the other side of the door, then came a gentle and familiar voice, Shirley, Shirley. Are you up? Still angry? Ads by PubFuture. Shirley's body visibly trembled at her mother's voice, those eyes drawing beads of tears as she greedily clung to the door like it would allow her to see the other person. Shirley, your dad and I are going to buy you a cake. It's our baby's birthday after all. When we come back, you won't be angry anymore, okay? Don't go, Shirley cried out, then the crying turned to desperate yells, don't go, don't leave. Don't leave me. I beg you, don't leave me. She finally lost it and started wailing like a baby that she was in this dream, don't 4x go. Don't go out. Don't go out there. However, time continued to flow as it did in the memory engraved inside her mind. Eventually, the folks outside left, followed by the rustling sound of the woman grabbing a purse, then the gearing turning sound of a key turning inside the front door. Shirley crumbled to the floorboard after hearing the final click of her parents' departure, signaling the start of the countdown. When her heartbeat reached 1,200 times, the exclamation of fire came from afar. When her heartbeat reached 1,600, the pungent smell of smoke penetrated through the cracks in the door. By the time her heartbeat reached 1,800, the streets were filled with the frenzied lights of red like the entire city had been thrown into molten magma. When her heartbeat finally hit 2,000, a heavy, muffled bang smashed through the front door, the same kind of sound of a giant beast crashing through the entrance and prowling about inside her home. Afterward, the door to her own room finally fell down as well, the very door that Shirley couldn't make a dent in. It's now shredded apart like paper. A terrifying creature had appeared there. Pitch black and oozing with dark miasma around the bony structure, this was a dark hound that was not her dog, and right now, it has found the 6-year-old girl in front of it as the perfect target to kill. Shirley calmly stared at the dark hound that had appeared in front of her. She knows this wasn't her friend but the perfect replication of the past she experienced. The hound stepped into the room, followed closely by the crunching sound of meat and flesh. Despite having one of her limbs being devoured, Shirley didn't move, nor did she scream at the piercing pain. In fact, her entire existence had become a numbing blob of nothingness as she recalled how long it took for the dark hound to become her dog. Was it a day, or a week? Gradually, her consciousness gradually faded until the dark dream started to blur inside her peripheral vision. But suddenly, her eyes picked up on a figure next to the bed, a deeper shadow that's not supposed to be there. From what she could tell, the figure seemed to have been there the entire time and didn't just pop out suddenly. This shouldn't be possible, at least not according to the countless times she had endured this torturous nightmare. I did not intend to pry. The gloomy and majestic figure finally spoke as a spark of green flame came to life, revealing the face behind the shadow. Chapter 130 Inches Everyone knows your bad name. Almost at the same time as the voice from the shadow came, an illusory boom rocked Shirley's head. It did not exist inside this dream, nor was it outside in reality, but an explosion within her soul. Instantly, the burning flames and the echoing cries of panicking crowds were gone, dissipating like the fog was cleared from her mind. In the next second, Shirley found that her body had changed as well, she had returned to her 17-year-old appearance. Her body was no longer in the familiar pajamas she remembered but rather in the black dress she wore on weekdays. As for her arm that's been devoured by the dark hound, it's also back to normal with a pitch black chain extending outwards to dog lying quietly in the corner. Shirley sat up at once, looking at the figure sitting on the bed in amazement and nervousness. She didn't know who this person was, but she knew it was a powerful existence that directly penetrated the curse of the shadows and invaded her dreams. You, who are you? Duncan stood up slowly. In this world of dreams, he had taken on his original appearance as Captain Duncan, which was oppressively daunting and enough to make Shirley flinch back subconsciously. You haven't seen me like this. It's normal, Duncan said quietly. I noticed you were having a nightmare, that's why I came to check. Noticed, so come to check. Shirley blinked, a little puzzled by the meaning, until she popped her mouth in understanding. Wait, you are. Let's get acquainted again. I'm Duncan, the gloomy and dignified man smiled, Duncan Abnomar. He said his name because he wasn't worried about Shirley running off to tell the authorities. Even if she did have the courage, the savvy hound would be wise enough to make her eat those words until she died. Duncan, Mr. Duncan, are you Mr. Duncan? Shirley's eyes widened in amazement, and a feeling of calm quietly permeated her heart. But, aren't you Nina's uncle? How come your last name is Abnomar? Duncan. The girl's reaction caught the man off guard there. After a few seconds of processing, he finally spoke with a strange expression. You haven't heard of this name before? Ads by PubFuture. Shirley thought about it and shook her head honestly. No. Then she reacted again, but with a look of fear this time. Should I have heard of this name? Duncan suddenly realized that this girl really had no idea about the natural mobile disaster of the boundless sea, meaning her reaction couldn't be faked. Apparently, even a reputation as big as his couldn't reach the likes of Shirley, who has a limited cognition of people. This actually left him a bit hollow and dispirited inside at not being famous enough. Are you illiterate? Unexpectedly, Shirley actually lowered her head and went mute. Forget it. It's not important. Duncan immediately ended the current topic when he saw the other party's reaction. At this point, the noise and flames on the street outside had subsided, so he could take his time observing the small room here. This is what you experienced back then, isn't it? Shirley kept her head lowered. I didn't mean to pry just now, but I discovered your secret while entering here, Duncan said sincerely. I'm sorry. Taken aback by the frank apology, she hurriedly took 2 steps back. No, it's okay. How can you apologize to me? In any case, it's not polite to spy on a lady's dream, even a little lady like you. Duncan smiled, then his gaze fell on the dark hound. When will he wake up? I don't know. Shirley looked slightly confused. Turning to face the sleeping dog in the corner, this nightmare has never changed like this. I don't. As soon as she was halfway through her sentence, she heard a slight sound of bones grinding against one another. Dog, who was still asleep seconds ago, suddenly jerked his skull up and glowed with a reddish hue in those eye sockets. Not waiting at all, Dog jumped up like he too had just woken up from a nightmare. Shirley, Dog spoke with a hint of panic after recognizing the girl. It's okay, it's just a nightmare. Shirley laughed and stepped forward to hug the big hound's ugly skull. You were having a nightmare too. I'm sorry. Dog just kept whimpering the apology, the chain rattling due to the trembling bones from the hound. Does it hurt? It must have hurt a lot. Shirley turned her head a little awkwardly. Don't go all soft on me, there are outsiders watching. Outsiders? Dog was stunned by the news. Only then did he notice the third party in the room with them. Without difficulty, the dark hound's reddish eyes saw the cascading green flames floating behind Duncan's gloomy appearance. Ads by PubFuture. Holy 4x. Dog exclaims out of the blue and reflexively drags Shirley behind himself for protection. He's trembling to the point that others might think he will fall apart if anything so much as touched him. You are that ghost captain. Duncan pricked his eyebrow at the reaction. Oh, you're able to recognize me despite Shirley not knowing. Dog. Shirley also picked up on this fact. Dog, have you seen him before? Do I even need to have met him? Any shadow demon who happens to meet him would have been sent into subspace by now. The black smoky miasma around Dog's bony figure rose and swirled in intensity, the signal that he preparing to fight despite the horror. The natural mobile disaster of the boundless sea, why is he in your dream? The boundless sea's mobile disaster. Shirley was still cluelessly blind to the title. Why have I never heard of this from you? No shit. I have plenty of things I never told you. There are so many natural disasters in this world, as if I would go over every one of them with you under normal circumstances. Who in their right mind would expect a ghost captain of the sea to be on land? Shirley seemingly wanted to ask another question when Duncan broke the conversation. I thought only the people of the real world were afraid of me, to think my reputation has reached even the shadow demons. Dog cowered back another step over the comment while maintaining an unfocused defensive posture. You may have underestimated yourself. Your infamy is known to everyone. From the darkness of the deep sea, to reality of the mortals, and even the demons of the shadows like me, we have all heard of you. If my kind had a heart to begin with, we would use your name as a charm to frighten the young. Duncan felt the analogy was a bit off and weird, but he's not going to doubt Dog's story. In fact, it's quite the compliment to be feared so heavily after learning his reputation had no effect on Shirley. At the same time, Shirley also heard Dog's mental whispering through the chains. Shirley, in a bit, I will find a way to hold off this shadow. You try and wake up. This is only a dream, so he likely can't follow you out to the real world. Shirley didn't react right away, only wondering what her partner meant. And then what? Dog continued hurriedly. Then you hurry to the next room and find the big boss for help. Just say that you are entangled by the vanished. Make your words sound earnest, and even take the initiative to ask to be the other party's kin if you can. This is too dangerous to consider the consequences. Rather than being dragged into subspace, it's better to be barely alive by following an evil god. Shirley didn't respond at all now. Shirley. Dog became increasingly more anxious. Shirley, don't daze out now. Hurry and find a way to wake up while I distract this shadow. The only way to fight a big boss is with another big boss. Halfway through Dog's desperate plea, Shirley finally replied through their spirit link. Dog, the big bosses you are mentioning are likely the same person. Dog.